New research by Good Morning Britain shows a surge in the mistrust of police by young people in Britain today.
So our survey had this detail. It was a survey of 1,000 14 to 24-year-olds, and it found that 30% of young people say they don't trust the police, and that's a rise of 8% compared with the same poll carried out in 2021.
Yeah, 48% of 14 to 24-year-olds polled said they believe the police are institutionally racist. That's up 10% on last year.
Well, 40% of that age group say that they or someone they know feels they've been racially profiled, and that is an increase of 11% from 2021.
We're now joined by Janine Davis, Director of child protection company Listen Up, who says until the police acknowledge there is institutional racism, things will never improve.
And we're also joined by activist and campaigner Kwejo Tweneboa, who says over the last year, some police behaviour has been shocking, and by former Detective Constable Peter Blexley, who says the overwhelming majority of police are motivated to do the right thing. Whatever way you cut it, worrying statistics, aren't they? Janine, these figures that show from our research that there's been an increase in distrust among young people over the last year. Does that surprise you? Where do you think it's come from?
Yeah, no, it doesn't surprise me at all. I think I'm surprised if anyone else is surprised, to be honest, because for many young people, particularly those from black and minoritised communities who continue to experience over-surveillance, over-policing, and this is something which has been happening, you know, for decades, I think for many, this is just a normalised experience. I guess because there has been, you know, increased media attention recently, there has been the publication of the local child safeguarding practice review in terms of the experiences of Child Q. There have been many, I guess, various different media publications focusing on the ways in which the police, in particular...
So attention has been drawn
I think attention has definitely influenced...
Which is a bad thing?
It's not a bad thing, but I do think there's something around, you know, the deserving and undeserving victims in terms of, well, when we have experiences which continue to be overlooked, and for many, I would say, again, black and minoritised children and young people, they've been talking about their experiences for a very long time, yet it only seems to be, I would say, as of late, that we're now hearing more about those experiences. And I think, for me, it's more around we have an issue with racism in the police force. When is this going to be acknowledged, and when are we going to start seeing change?
Yeah.
Kwejo, the thing I find really quite significant, which I mentioned earlier, is that we get that statistic there for 48% of young people feel that the police is institutionally racist. And when you look at the makeup of who we surveyed at GMB, it's also 48% of white people. So it's not just black and Asian people who feel that. This has become a bigger issue. And I said earlier that I think it's the right word. It's reassuring from a person of colour's point of view that other people are realising this as well. It's not just become an issue just for people of colour.
No, definitely, and I think it's good in terms of racial profiling and institutionalised racism. Am I surprised? No, not particularly. I mean, 2020, for example, young black males were 19 times more likely to be stopped and searched than any other ethnicity. And I mean, using examples of my friends and family, my brother, for example, was stopped and he was pulled over for smelling of weed. My brother doesn't smoke. My friends have been stopped because they fit the description, which is very common, and a lot of young males will be able to relate to that. They fit the description of a suspect. You then ask, describe that suspect to me. They're black. How many black people are in London? It doesn't make no sense. But then you look at Child Q, and we cannot take away institutionalised misogyny too, because that does
Just remind people of Child Q. She was the girl who also was reported by her teachers to be smelling of weed, of marijuana. And the police eventually were called to conduct a strip search.
Correct. Which
left her deeply traumatised. She found was no drugs on her, wasn't she?
And that's an example that I mean. So we talk about trust and being surprised that a lot more people don't trust the police for racism, but also for misogyny, and whether we're surprised. And examples like that, it's happened time and time again in the last year and a half. And people aren't surprised. People are deeply disgusted with it, I think, but they're not surprised, and they shouldn't be, because we see it time and time again. How can we trust them when this continuously happens?
Peter, you believe in the police, you believe in the goodness of police. Do you start to feel, when you hear stories like this, that you're being pushed into a place of sort of defending the indefensible, or do you still stick to your position that, broadly speaking, the police aren't as bad as these incidents appear?
I will never defend the indefensible.
No.
And in the last 20 years or more, I have been very swift to criticise the police when I have felt that they've fallen way short. And I've not been short of experiences in that regard, or opportunities, should I say. However, in your darkest hour, when you are unfortunate enough to experience that, perhaps you're caught up in a terrorist incident, perhaps one of your loved ones has suddenly passed away, perhaps you or somebody you know has been the victim of a serious assault. The list goes on. In that darkest hour, when you dial 999, the overwhelming likelihood is that the police officer to come and deal with you in your moment of grief, trauma, fear, will be a well-motivated, decent, upstanding member of the police service who will do everything they possibly can for you. That said, there are many other circumstances, because, of course, policing is such a broad-ranging occupation, and in recent times, when, sadly, the police have fallen well short of what we should expect.
But the issue here, Peter, and you're absolutely right, there are some many very good policemen and women. Of course there are. But this is often goes into the argument that it's a few bad apples, and it's not a few bad apples. What is apparent, this has been going on for years. As long as I've been alive, this has been talked about. What we're talking about is institutional racism. There is which tells you there's a structural issue, there's a cultural issue within the police force. And it seems to me the fact that we're still talking about it, it makes it even more apparent that there is an issue there, isn't there?
Much of the current policing model was based on a royal commission into policing that occurred in the early 1960s. And sadly, so much of the current structures are really still based on that outdated, not fit-for-purpose model.
Right, so it needs an absolute root and branch in order to help the police, men and women that are trying to operate fairly and justly, to have a system in which, and a culture in which to operate that's better.
Indeed, because there's a lack of trust within the police. Many of the frontline officers that will come to your aid do not trust their supervisors and their managers. They feel that those senior officers are about self-service and not public service, and they're too preoccupied with climbing the greasy pole of promotion. There are catastrophic issues within policing that need to be dealt with by having a complete overview, not these piecemeal inquiries that we hear being undertaken by Dame so-and-so or Baroness so-and-so. We need a thorough root and branch, because police, in many regards, policing is failing us. But just to reiterate, in your darkest hour, please trust that cop.
Absolutely.
We've got to.
Janine, what changes would you like to see?
I think, for me, just touching on that point, please trust that cop. No, go and say that to, those experiencing sexual exploitation. Go and say that to those who are in sex work. Go and say that to those black and minoritized women. Go and say that to the experienced people, such as those, women and girls who continue to be overlooked. When we talk about misogyny, we need to talk about misogynoir. Go and say that to the everyday black boy who's being stopped by TSG. Go and tell them that, your everyday cop is there to support you. When we talk, so when we think about safety and mistrust, for me, if you are a person and you want to go to the police station and you've been, impacted by harm, we need to ensure we're not just taking a universal assumption that safety is going to be the police. For many, the police are those who enforce harm.
So what specific change? Do you agree that it needs to be a complete overhaul of the police system, structurally, the whole way it's set up?
I would like there to be an acknowledgement. That has to be the starting point. We're still questioning if racism exists within our society. We still have an issue with just naming it and using really palatable language, such as unconscious bias or whatever else we use. I would like to see an acknowledgement that racism exists.
It's a feeling I had this morning, actually, when I read that, we looked at our survey, and 48% of white people, young white people, also agree agreed the institutional racism. It's that acknowledgement, isn't it? That it doesn't feel that it feels like some sort of personal vendetta that people colour have, and or it's irrational, or it's based on nothing. And often hearing people from the police admit that, look, there is a problem. It's half of the battle, isn't it?
Yeah. Otherwise, there's an erasure. There's an erasure of experiences. There's an overlooking, and you're just dismissing the reality for many.
OK. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us, Peter, Janine and Kwejo. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.